Now, Reverend Meeks asked me to come this morning and speak about black history. He knows that one of the things that I deeply enjoy and appreciate doing is talking about the dilemmas of black folk in America. That comes from my mother, who used to sit and read to me from the Bible when I was a young man. And I used to sit and watch her cry and soak her feet at night, because in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, she had to work in a tobacco factory where she'd stand up all day long and stem tobacco until her fingers would bleed. She'd come home and soak them. And I would sit there and cry with her. And I would say, one day, I want to be like Samson out of the Bible and go back and fight for black folk to correct these kind of conditions for black folk in the land. So there won't be any more black mothers suffering like my mother suffered. And so what I did, I tried my best after being in politics, in all levels of politics for a number of years, being in the White House with President Carter, being over education for the state of Florida, being the black first assistant secretary in the United States Department of Commerce, and being over a board of governors, chairman for a board of governors. I said I must bring all my intelligence and experience to bear to see if I can solve some of these problems for black people in this country. And so the first thing I did, I wrote a book called Black Labor, White Wealth, to define the problems for black folk in America like it's never been defined before. It ain't about all this stuff about personalities. It's about what are the conditions that precipitated black folk getting into this dilemma. And what Black Labor, White Wealth did, it tracked 800 years of history in very systematic terms to show you every strategy, every technique, every law, every public custom, and every public policy that was used to enslave black folk around the world and to maldistribute almost 100% of all this nation's wealth, power, resource, privileges, businesses, and controls of all levels of government into the hands of the dominant white society. And what slavery and Jim Crow segregation did with black folk, it intentionally maldistributed all the resources away from black folk and created a real-life monopoly game. Black folk in America are playing in a real-life monopoly game that you're totally ill-prepared to play and win. And if you know anything about monopoly, monopoly is based on everybody sitting down and getting a fair share of the resources, the money in their hand before the game starts. Black folk, you can't play because you never got your 40 acres and a mule. You're sitting and playing a game that you're not going to win. And if you know anything about monopoly, the primary principles that go around the board and take the money that you have and buy land and buy the best land around the board. And if you can't buy land, then you buy businesses like electric company, the railroad, and the water company. And you buy your land, and when you develop your land, you put houses on it. And once you could receive enough rent from people landing on your houses, you then take your money and buy hotels. And then after you buy the hotels, you sit there and wait for all the rest to come around and land on your property and bring some wealth and power home to you. And see, my people have been playing real-life monopoly with no money, going around the board hoping the world that they can land on free park and income tax and charity. And when you play that kind of a game in real-life monopoly, sooner or later you're going to land on the wrong property. And when you land on the wrong property in monopoly, you got two choices. You either go to jail or you go bankrupt and get out of the game. And black folk are playing in a real-life monopoly game. And I wrote Black Labor, White Wealth to tell you exactly what the game was and how you're not playing it right. And then I followed that up with another book called Powernomics, says now that tracks and picks up exactly where Black Labor, White Wealth left off. And I'm delighted by the fact that black folk took that book, Black Labor, White Wealth, and went to Geneva, Switzerland, and filed for reparations around the world. And that book then sets the premise of what your problem is in America. In America, your problem is simple. You do not own and control anything of wealth and resources. You do not own and control anything more than 1/2 or 1% of anything important in the society. And yet, by the same token, you're bearing 600 to 800 times your fair share of everything that's bad. And consequently, we cannot play and win, and people wonder why black folk live the way they do, why every black neighborhood looks like Beirut bombed out. It's that way because we do not own and control any resources and never have. And so in that Powernomics, I said, if you're going to play the game, here's a book that I've systematically analyzed all the conditions around the world with all of my experiences, not only in government and in education, but also as a safety and survival engineer for the Marine Corps, where I had to try to deal with our prisoners coming out of POW camps. Here's how you play the game and win. Empowernomics, the national plan to empower black folk. That book and all those books are going to be in the rear room and for you to purchase this morning. But most importantly, the third book that I wrote was called Dirty Little Secrets About Black History, Black Heroes, and Other Troublemakers. And I've written 2 of those books. And the purpose of those books are to tell you that you are special people, very special people as black folk. That absolutely nothing has happened in the last 400 or 500 years that black folk did not either directly were involved in or indirectly did not cause. You were the engines that drove civilizations around the world for 300 years. You as black folk are not guests in America. You are not guests on this earth. You walk on sacred ground paid for by the blood, sweat, and tears and suffering and sacrificing of millions of black people. They paid for you to walk on this earth with your head high and to be proud. All the blacks who shine shoes and wash clothes and wash dishes and pick cotton, you all deserve to have a better condition on this earth. And Dirty Little Secrets tell you why you're special people. And later on in my discourse this morning, I'm going to point out the 3 things I'm going to talk about. First is the state of black America presently. Second thing is how we got into our dilemma. The third thing to tell you that you are not only special people on this earth, but you've always had a special relationship with God that no other people have ever had. And all of that is embedded in the one thing that you keep running away from, and that is your blackness. Your blackness is power. The most powerful thing on this earth is your blackness. And you got to understand by the time I finish today what power and blackness there is. And unfortunately, we've never used it. We've been too much like the biblical scriptures in Matthew 26 that talks about 14 through 30 about the 10 talents and the 3 slaves. And we have tended to be like that third slave. When you had a master in the Bible that took and gave wealth and talents to 3 slaves, and he went off traveling in a distant land, and when he came back and asked for a report on what they'd done with the money, the talents that he'd given them, the first 2 told the master, here's what I got now. I've invested what you gave me. I invested the talents and the gifts that you gave me, and I have multiplied it. I've doubled what you gave me. The third one, when he asked him, what did you do with the money I gave you and the resources and talents and the gifts? He said, I didn't do anything with them. I buried it because I was scared to use what I had, the gifts and the talents that you've given me. That reminds me like of black folk that I don't want you to be like that anymore. To hide the talents and the gifts that you've been given. And the master said to the third slave, get away from me. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to take away all the talents and gifts that I've given you. And I'm going to give them to everybody else except you. And then I'm going to cast you into the darkness, into blackness. And so that all I want to hear from the future from you is suffering and crying and pain. And that's what has happened to us in many respects as black folk. We've given up the specialness that we have as black folk in our black power, the power of our blackness and our special relationship that we had with God. And consequently, we are in a dilemma. And contrary to what anybody on earth tells you, I don't care whether it comes out of a black mouth or a white mouth, anybody on this earth that tells you that black folk are progressing is lying to you. In proportional and comparative terms, black folk are exactly where they were in 1860 on the eve of the Civil War. You have not moved not one iota in 140 years. You were on the bottom in 1860, you're still on the bottom. You're still outside and underneath our system, our economic structure. I don't care whether they're boom periods or bust periods. I don't know whether they're good times or depression or recession. You're outside and underneath. Consequently, when whites catch colds, you're going to catch pneumonia. You're not a part of the system. And right now, as I said, in 1860, as an example, at that time, you had approximately 287,000 black people that were free. That was in quasi-freedom. They weren't really free, they were quasi-free. They were not enslaved. The other 4.5 million blacks were still on plantations and in slavery. And those 287,000 black folk had successfully acquired one half of 1% of this nation's wealth in 1860 on the eve of the Civil War. I don't even picking cotton or having their own little businesses or waiting on tables. They had acquired one half of 1% of this nation's wealth. And here we are, 140 years later, when you're supposedly free and gone through a civil rights movement, you still only own and control one half of 1% of this nation's wealth. You have not moved one iota in acquiring the most significant and the most important thing in our society. It is not civil rights. It is not integration that's going to give you equality and equal opportunity. It is what you own and control that makes a difference in your society. If you own and control nothing, you'll get nothing. There is no equal opportunity without having the equal amount of resources and power and wealth to be able to carry it out. And black folk at that time, as I said, had one half of 1%. Also in 1860, as an example to show you have not progressed. At that time, I check around in all the books that I've read all these years, almost 99% of all the black people in America were working at that time in some capacity, making money, wealth, power, income, businesses, and personal comfort for whites. And now I look around the society 140 years later in all of America, and still 98% of all black people in America are still working either in white corporations or some level of government or working for other people, making money, wealth, and personal comfort for them. Only 2% of all the black people in America work in their own communities and their own business for their own people. The rest are still trying to be working in levels of government, federal, state, city, school teaching, and working for someone else. We only got 2% that can call themselves independent. Also, I looked to see what was happening in the 1860s versus today. I looked at all the prisons across the country documented in research. In Savannah, Georgia, in Atlanta, Georgia, in Boston, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., I looked at the prison roll. Even though you only had 287,000 black folk who were free, black people made up over 51% of the prisoners in 1860. Even though only 287,000 was free, the other 4.5 million still locked in slavery, you still made up 51% of the prisoners. Here you are today, 140 years later, as happy as you want to be, but yet still, 51% of the prisoners in the United States are still black. You talk about at that time, all those blacks who were out of slavery, most of them couldn't even get jobs because of the high unemployment. Because nobody wanted it. They were either unemployed or underemployed. I look around across America, and now everybody on TV is talking about the possibility of losing jobs with the coming recession or depression. It's not going to impact black folk that much because you've always been unemployed and underemployed.